The alarm went off at 6:15, same as every morning, and Daniel Hayes reached for it with the practiced efficiency of a man who had long since stopped hoping sleep might last a little longer. He silenced it, lay still for exactly one breath, a small concession to the version of himself that used to linger, and then swung his feet to the cold floor. The house was quiet in the particular way that houses with children are quiet before children wake. A held breath, a pause before the storm. Daniel moved through the dark hallway in wool socks, one hand trailing the wall not because he couldn't see but because it was a habit. Something he did without thinking, the same way he still made 2 cups of coffee some mornings before catching himself. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled faintly of the pine wreath Lily had insisted they hang on the refrigerator door, even though it was already the second week of January and the needles were beginning to drop. He hadn't taken it down. He told himself he'd do it this weekend, same as he'd told himself last weekend. He filled the kettle, set it on the burner, and stood at the window over the sink. Aspen in January. The street outside was buried under 18 inches of fresh snow, untouched except for the pair of tracks left by whoever walked their dog at some ungodly hour before dawn. The houses across the road looked like illustrations in a children's book, warm amber rectangles of light in dark facades, smoke curling from chimneys, everything softened by white, beautiful and almost unbearably still. Daniel poured his coffee, just 1 cup, and carried it to the kitchen table, where Lily's drawing from school was still spread out from the night before. A house, a stick figure with messy yellow hair that he recognized as himself because she'd given it his perpetual slight frown. Beside it, another stick figure, smaller, holding what appeared to be either a dog or a loaf of bread. He'd asked. She said it was a dog. They didn't have a dog. He drank his coffee and looked at the drawing for a long time. At 6:50, he climbed the stairs and knocked gently on Lily's door. "Hey, Bug." Time. A groan. A theatrical groan, the kind that communicated not sleepiness, but the profound injustice of all alarm clocks and school days. 5 minutes, came the small voice. You said that yesterday, and the day before. He pushed the door open. She was a lump under a quilt printed with stars and moons, only the crown of her head visible, dark hair fanned across the pillow. 5 minutes, yesterday turned into 20 and you didn't eat breakfast. I ate half a granola bar. Silence. Lily. Fine. The lump stirred. A face appeared, flushed and indignant, eyes still half closed. 7 years old and already perfecting the art of the withering look. He didn't know where she got it. Her mother, probably. Most of the things that took his breath away about Lily came from her mother. He turned back downstairs to make her oatmeal, adding the brown sugar the way she liked, stirring it while he listened to the sounds of her getting ready overhead, the thump of feet on the floor, the running water. A brief negotiation with herself about which socks, conducted in a murmur he couldn't quite make out. They ate together. She told him something elaborate about a disagreement between 2 of her friends that had apparently shaken the social foundations of the 2nd grade. He listened, or appeared to, making the right sounds in the right places while the radiator ticked and the window filled slowly with gray morning light. By 7:30, they were outside. Lily, in her red coat with the faux fur hood that she'd chosen herself and wore with tremendous pride, Daniel carrying her backpack because she'd traded him carrying it in exchange for an extra chapter of reading last night. He didn't remember agreeing to this, but he apparently had, and so he carried it. Their breath made white clouds in the air. The snow had been shoveled from the front walk but refilled overnight, and he made a mental note, one of 100 quiet mental notes that constituted the running infrastructure of his days, to do it again before dark. Lily's school was 4 blocks away. In good weather, a pleasant walk. In January, a small expedition requiring negotiation of snowdrifts and the patch of black ice near the corner of Spruce that he'd reported to the town 3 times, and that remained, stubbornly, a patch of black ice. He guided her around it by instinct. Hand on her shoulder. The way he navigated every morning. The way he navigated everything. After he dropped her off, he stood outside the school fence for a moment in the cold, watching the yellow doors close behind her. Then he walked home alone. This was the part of the day he had never quite gotten used to the return. The house felt different when he came back to it solo, the warmth somehow less welcoming, the quiet less restful. He had a freelance project to work on. Structural engineering, consulting, the kind of work he could do from his dining room table in a flannel shirt with no meetings until afternoon. Good work, steady. He was grateful for it. He was grateful for all of it. He told himself this frequently. He was standing on the front porch with his coffee, already grown cold, watching the empty white street, when the moving truck came around the corner. He almost went inside. There was no particular reason to stand there watching someone else's moving truck. It wasn't a spectator sport, it was just logistics. Boxes and furniture and strangers doing the slow, heavy work of beginning again somewhere new. But the coffee was still in his hand, and the morning was still, and some quiet part of him was simply glad to have something to look at that wasn't his own silence. The truck was large and orange. It backed carefully up the driveway of the house, directly across from the Hendersons' old place, vacant since October, when they'd moved to Phoenix for his retirement. The house had sat empty for months, its windows dark and its porch holding nothing but a dead potted fern that nobody had come back to collect. Two men climbed out of the cab. Then the passenger door on the far side opened and a woman stepped out. She had her back to him at first. Dark coat, dark hair pulled into a loose knot at the nape of her neck. She was looking at the house, hands in her pockets, tilting her head slightly the way people do when they're trying to imagine something as home that isn't home yet. Then one of the movers said something and she turned to answer him, and her face came into the light. Daniel's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. The cold air seemed to sharpen, very suddenly, to something almost physical. He knew that face. He had spent an embarrassing amount of time. At 22, being helplessly fluent in that face, the slight upturn at the corners of her mouth, the way her expression arranged itself in response to something funny, into 3 distinct stages before the actual smile arrived. The small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall she'd told him about once, a rambling story that had ended with her laughing so hard she couldn't finish it. Emily Carter. The thought arrived not as recognition, but as something more like a collision. A decade of accumulated distance compressed into a single sharp second. She was giving directions to the movers, gesturing toward the front door with one hand. Competent and calm in the easy way, she had always been competent and calm, the way that had always made the space around her feel more organized. She hadn't looked his direction yet. He wasn't sure if he was glad about that or the opposite. He should go inside. This was the clear and sensible thing to do. He was standing on his front porch in yesterday's flannel shirt, holding a cold cup of coffee, staring. He was a grown man of 33, a father, a professional. He should go inside. He didn't go inside. She turned, finally, toward the street, maybe checking for traffic, maybe just orienting herself to the neighborhood, and her gaze crossed his porch, and stopped. The pause lasted long enough to be unmistakable. Not just the ordinary pause of noticing a neighbor, but something that went longer and changed quality partway through. She lifted one hand, slowly, in something that was almost a wave. He raised his. Barely. She took a few steps toward the street, like she wasn't quite sure, and then stopped at the edge of her new driveway. He came down his front steps, which was apparently something his legs had decided to do without consulting him. They met, more or less, at the invisible line between their two properties, on the snow-covered sidewalk, 5 feet apart, in the kind of cold that made everything very clear. "Daniel?" Her voice was the same, slightly lower than you'd expect, the kind of voice that made a quiet room quieter. "Emily." And then, because there was no version of this moment that wasn't strange, "You're moving in." A sound escaped her that was not quite a laugh. "Yeah, I'm moving in." She looked at him the way you look at something you're not sure is actually there. Of all the streets in Aspen, of all the streets, She glanced back at the house, then at him. The mover was waiting in the doorway with a look of professional patience. She called something back to him, then turned again to Daniel. "I have to," she gestured. "Right. Of course." But she stopped. Started again. "Coffee? Later? Sometime?" He nodded. He was still holding his cup. She saw it, and something shifted at the corner of her mouth, not quite the smile yet, just its precursor. Then she turned and walked back up the drive, calling instructions over her shoulder, and became again a stranger with boxes and logistics and the ordinary business of starting over. Daniel stood in the snow for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he went inside to make fresh coffee and sat at his dining room table and did not open his laptop for a very long time. He had met Emily Carter in the fall of his junior year in a structural analysis course that neither of them had particularly wanted to take. She was pre-architecture, he was civil engineering, and they'd been seated in the same row by alphabetical accident: Hayes, then Jensen, then Carter, rearranged by some administrative error that he had afterward thought of as the best administrative error of his life. She'd borrowed his notes once, early in the semester, then a pencil. Then she'd started saving him a seat without being asked, which he hadn't remarked upon, because remarking upon it might have changed it. By October, they were studying together twice a week in the library, spreading their work across the whole of a corner table, existing in a comfortable parallel silence punctuated by questions and arguments about load distribution and the political history of urban planning, and whether the dining hall's concept of soup qualified legally as soup. By November, they were eating together most evenings. By December, when the semester ended, Daniel Hayes had developed a set of feelings for Emily Carter that he had absolutely no idea what to do with. He had almost told her. He'd constructed sentences in his head while walking to class, while lying awake, while listening to her talk about a building she'd seen in a magazine, and loved sentences that started with, "I think I might," or "the thing is," and then dissolved under the weight of what came after them, because what came after them was uncertainty. Doubt, a fear not of rejection exactly, but of alteration, of the possibility that saying something might change the particular quality of the silence they'd built, which he valued more than almost anything he had at the time. She never said anything either. Spring semester came, and they fell back into the same rhythms without discussion. The same table, the same comfortable geography. They graduated in May, she in her architecture program, he in civil engineering, surrounded by family and the particular noise of endings, and stood together in their robes for a photograph someone's parent took, squinting into the sun. He'd hugged her goodbye. She'd said, "Call me." He'd said, "Absolutely." He had not called, and she had not called, and the weeks had stretched into months, and the months had stretched into the particular formlessness of early adulthood, when everyone is moving to different cities and beginning different lives, and the connections that once seemed structural reveal themselves to have been situational. He'd met Claire the following year, married her at 28. Lily was born at 29. Claire left at 31, not cruelly, not dramatically, just with the quiet inevitability of two people who had perhaps confused proximity for compatibility, who had wanted different things from life and taken too long to say so. She lived in Denver now, saw Lily on alternating weekends. It was, as these things went, a reasonable arrangement. Everyone was civil. No one was happy about it, and no one pretended otherwise. He had thought about Emily occasionally over the years the way you think about the forks in roads you no longer have access to, with a kind of abstract wistfulness that doesn't quite qualify as grief. He'd looked her up once, years ago, which told him she was working for an architecture firm in Boston and had gotten married. He'd closed the browser window and hadn't looked again. He texted her the next afternoon. He stared at his phone for 20 minutes first, drafted 4 different messages, deleted 3, and sent the 4th, which said, "Hi, this is still strange. Coffee tomorrow? There's a place called Snowbird 2 blocks down that makes acceptable espresso." she replied within minutes. Acceptable is an endorsement I can work with. 10 a.m.? He was there at 9:50. She arrived at 10:02, unwinding a wool scarf as she came through the door, her cheeks red from the cold, and spotted him immediately, because the cafe was small and he had apparently chosen the most visible possible table. "You're early," she said, sitting down across from him. "You're 2 minutes late?" "I'm impressively punctual given that I don't know where anything is in this town yet." She wrapped both hands around the menu card, studying it. "I couldn't find my keys for 15 minutes this morning because I put them somewhere sensible while unpacking, and can no longer identify what I considered sensible at the time." "The bowl by the front door," he said. She looked up. "That's where keys go. They go in a bowl by the front door. It's non-negotiable." "I don't have a bowl." "I'll find you a bowl." A silence settled. The kind that was both comfortable and charged, which was approximately the problem. She looked at him across the table, directly, the way she'd always been willing to look at things directly when other people glanced away. "So," she said, 10 years. 10 years. You first, or me first?" He told her. The engineering degree put to use, the years in Denver, meeting Claire, Lily, the move to Aspen 4 years ago for a quieter life and lower altitude stress, the divorce, without editorializing. He was aware of how compressed it sounded, an entire decade in 5 minutes. But some things resist expansion. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "I'm sorry about the divorce. It was the right thing. Eventually, those things are more complicated in the middle than they look from either end." She nodded. She understood that. He could tell. Her version was different, and also somehow the same. Boston, the firm. A husband named Marcus she'd met through a colleague, 4 years of marriage that had started confidently and ended in the quiet recognition that two people could share a home and still be fundamentally alone in it. She'd left the firm when she left the marriage. Both endings at once had felt devastating, and then, with some months of distance, clarifying. A friend mentioned an opening at a small studio in Aspen. She'd applied on what felt like impulse and turned out to be something more like instinct. "So here I am," she said, "starting over. On your street, apparently, because the universe has a very particular sense of humor." "The universe," he agreed. She smiled, then the real one. All 3 stages arriving, and then the actual smile, and he felt the same thing he'd felt at 22, except now he was 33, and it arrived with the additional weight of everything in between. "There's something I need to ask you," she said. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "And I want you to be honest." He waited. "Did you ever—" She stopped, looked at the table, then back up. "When we were in school, did you have feelings for me?" The question sat in the air between them, clean and direct, because Emily Carter had always been willing to ask the thing that needed asking. "Yes," he said. A slow exhale. "I had feelings for you too." "I know," he said. And then, I suspected. I thought I was imagining it. They looked at each other across the small table in the small cafe, while outside the snow continued its patient, relentless work of covering everything. 10 years, she said, finally. Not with bitterness, just with the particular weight of a fact. We were both very polite about it, pathologically so. He looked at her. She looked at him. The radiator against the far wall ticked steadily, counting something. Her furnace stopped working 3 days later. She knocked on his door at 8 in the evening, still in her coat, breath visible, holding her phone with a contractor's number pulled up who had a 4-day waiting list. He grabbed his toolkit without a second thought. The furnace was in the basement, which smelled of old wood and the particular cold of spaces that haven't been heated in months. He crouched in front of the unit with his flashlight, and Emily crouched beside him, which she didn't have to do. She could have gone back upstairs and let him work, but she'd always been someone who wanted to understand the thing. not just wait for it to be fixed. It's the igniter, he said. Is that bad? It's fixable. I have a spare. I keep parts for this model because mine did the same thing last winter. Give me 40 minutes. She handed him tools when he asked for them, guessing correctly twice out of 3 times which one he meant, and they worked in companionable, near silence, the furnace clicking and then rumbling to life as the basement slowly began. Cautiously, to warm. When they came back upstairs, Lily was sitting on Emily's front step in her coat, having apparently escaped Daniel's house while he'd told her to stay put, which he should have known was optimistic. Your furnace is fixed, Lily announced to Emily, with the confidence of someone who had personally overseen the operation. Emily looked down at her, then at Daniel. Is this your... Lily? Yes. Who was supposed to be at home? I got bored, Lily said, without any particular remorse. She was studying Emily with the frank curiosity of a child who has not yet learned the social contract that governs the staring at strangers. You have red hair. Your real hair, not the fake kind. I do, Emily agreed. My friend Kayla's mom has the fake kind. It's orange. Thank you, I think. It's a compliment, Lily clarified. Do you want to come have hot chocolate at our house? We have the kind with the little marshmallows. Daniel opened his mouth to intervene. Emily, without looking at him, said, That sounds really good, actually. They sat at his kitchen table, the 3 of them, while the marshmallows dissolved slowly into their respective mugs, and Lily explained at length the situation with her friend Kayla's mom and the orange hair, which was apparently an ongoing saga with more chapters than Daniel had realized. Emily listened with her chin in her hand and asked follow-up questions that made Lily talk faster, more eagerly, leaning forward over her mug. He made a second round of hot chocolate. No one asked him to. It just seemed like the right thing. Lily fell asleep on the couch at 9:15, mid-sentence about something that had happened at recess, and Daniel carried her upstairs while Emily stood in the hallway below, one hand on the banister. When he came back down, she said, quietly, She's a lot, he said. In the best way. She reminds me of you. The way she concentrates on things. He hadn't known that was something he did. He filed it away. They stood in the hallway. The house was warm and quiet, the kitchen light casting a gold stripe across the floor, and outside the snow was doing what snow in Aspen does, which is simply continue. Thank you, she said. For the furnace. For the hot chocolate. The hot chocolate was Lily's idea. Still. She pulled her coat off the hook, wrapped her scarf, and looked at him the way she had across the cafe table directly, unafraid. Same time tomorrow? I found a cafe on 5th that supposedly has better espresso than your acceptable place. Allegedly acceptable, he corrected. That's the claim. Come, prove it wrong. She left through the front door, and he stood at the window and watched her cross the dark street to her house, where a light was now on in the ground floor window. He stood there until the cold fogged the glass, and then he went to wash the mugs. 3 weeks passed, then 4. The rhythm of their days began, without any formal negotiation, to develop its own structure coffees on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, before his 9 o'clock calls, after she dropped her portfolio mock-ups at the studio. Occasional evenings when the dinner she was making was too much for one person, or when he was on his second cup of wine and the house felt large. Lily had adopted Emily with the uncomplicated loyalty of a child who had already decided the answer before asking the question. She saved drawings for her. She reported the Kayla situation updates in real time. She had begun, alarmingly, to call Emily's house Em's house, as casually as she called the grocery store the store, a designation that required no explanation. One evening in late January, while Lily was at a birthday party and the house was fully, unusually quiet, Daniel and Emily sat across from each other at his kitchen table with wine and the leftovers of a pasta he'd made. and the comfortable, rambling conversation of people who have known each other long enough to stop performing. She told him something she hadn't told him before. Marcus, the ex-husband, had not been unkind. That was the part, she said, had made it harder in some ways, the absence of a clear villain. He'd been present, responsible, dutiful. He'd simply not been there, the way you need someone to be there, fully occupying the space of a life beside yours rather than running parallel to it on a track that never quite intersects. She'd stopped being surprised by him years before she left. She'd realized, too late or maybe just in time, that surprise was something she needed. "That sounds very specific," Daniel said. "It took me a long time to figure out how to say it specifically." He turned his glass in his hands. "What does being there look like?" "To you?" She thought about it. Noticing things. Not the big things. Everyone notices the big things. The small ones. The way your mood changes when you're about to say something that matters. The specific way someone is quiet when they're troubled versus when they're just tired. Marcus never knew the difference. He was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "After you graduated, the spring I almost called you." He looked at his glass. "I had my phone out. I'd written your number down from the list we'd all exchanged before commencement." He paused. "I didn't call." "Why not?" "I don't know." "Cowardice, probably. The specific kind that tells you it's pragmatism so you don't have to look at it directly." She didn't say anything immediately. The refrigerator hummed. The radiator ticked. "I almost emailed you once," she said. "Around year 2 in Boston. I don't know what I would have said. Just I was having a bad week and you were the person I thought of." She looked at him. "I didn't send it." "Why not?" "Same reason." A faint exhale. The specific kind that tells you it's practicality. They sat with that for a while, neither of them trying to turn it into something tidy or hopeful or instructive, just sitting with what it was. The shape of 10 years, which had been partially an accident and partially a choice, and was not fully either. "I'm not telling you this to—" She stopped. "I don't know what I'm telling you this for. I just wanted you to know. I'm glad you told me." He looked at her. She looked at him. The kitchen was warm and small, and the snow outside was doing what it did, patient and absolute. And Daniel Hayes, who had spent the better part of 4 years being very careful not to want things too much, felt something shift in his chest. Not a dramatic thing, just a small, structural thing, the kind that determines which direction everything else falls. "Emily, don't," she said, quickly, gently. "Not yet." He nodded. "I need—" She stopped again. "I'm not doing this badly on purpose. I just need to be sure I'm not trading one thing for another. Filling a space. I don't want that to be what this is." "It's not," he said. And then, because it was true and she deserved the true version, "But I understand needing to be sure of that yourself." She nodded. She picked up her glass. They talked about other things, her studio project, a frustrating city permit process, a book he was halfway through, and the evening went on. Warm and ordinary, and nothing was resolved. But something had been said, and saying it had been its own kind of beginning. February arrived and softened Aspen's edges, the way only more snow can by adding to the accumulation until the landscape becomes surreal. The roof lines disappearing, the streets narrowing to tunnels of white. Lily's school held its winter showcase on a Thursday evening, in the gymnasium decorated with paper snowflakes and construction paper animals, the kind of event that demands parental attendance and somehow, despite its simplicity, consistently delivers something that bypasses adult defenses entirely. The children sang in 2 rows. They were not in tune. They were not synchronized. They were completely, perfectly earnest. Lily spotted Emily in the 3rd row, and her face, mid-song, broke into a grin large enough to derail the child beside her. Daniel watched from the back, one hand in his jacket pocket, and caught Emily's eye, and she was already smiling. Afterward, in the gymnasium with paper cups of apple cider, Lily installed herself between them with the proprietary confidence of a child who considers herself the primary party in any gathering. She showed Emily her part of the class mural on the wall, which depicted, with significant artistic license, their neighborhood. Daniel recognized his own house by the stick figure on the porch. "Is that me?" he asked. "That's you with your coffee," Lily confirmed. "And that's M's house? And that's M." The figure across the street had red hair, rendered in crayon with obvious enthusiasm. Emily looked at the mural for a long moment. "I love it," she said. "You can have it when we take it down," Lily said magnanimously. "That's a good gift." On the walk home, Lily walked between them, holding a parent's hand on each side, which was something she did with Daniel and sometimes with her mother on weekends, a practical arrangement for navigating snowdrifts, and she had simply extended it to Emily without comment or ceremony, and Emily had taken her hand without hesitation. Daniel watched them from his side, his daughter's small red mitten and Emily's wool glove, connected in the dark and the cold. Later, after Lily was in bed, he and Emily stood on his front porch with the end of evening quiet between them. The sky had cleared and the stars over the mountains were extravagant. The kind of sky you only get at altitude in February, cold, sharpened, and improbable. "She put you in the mural," he said. "I noticed." He stopped. Started again. "She doesn't do that." Emily looked at the sky. "She's a remarkable kid, Daniel." "I know." "And then, she likes you very much." "I like her very much." A pause. "I like you very much." He didn't answer, because answering felt like overcomplicating something she'd said simply and correctly. He just stood beside her in the cold and watched the mountains. "I'm not scared anymore," she said. Quietly, not performing it. Just putting it down somewhere between them, the way you put something fragile on a table, carefully. He turned to look at her. "Of filling a space," she said. "I've been thinking about what I said, about needing to be sure. And I'm sure." She met his eyes. "This isn't filling anything, this is something else." He watched her face in the cold, in the starlight, and knew that she was right. The way she was usually right about the things she'd thought through carefully. This was something else. It had been something else since the afternoon he'd stood on his porch with a cold cup of coffee and his life had driven up in an orange truck. "I know," he said. He made dinner on a Saturday. It was not a planned production he cooked on Saturdays as a matter of course, something more elaborate than the weekday defaults, something that required actual attention. But this Saturday he found himself considering the menu more carefully than usual. Which was information. Emily came at 7. She brought wine and a candle she'd found while unpacking a box she'd apparently been avoiding since moving day. "A good candle," she said, "the kind you save for the right occasion instead of using until the right occasion has to be invented." She lit it on the kitchen table. They ate and talked about the studio project, which was progressing a redesign of a community center in the valley, the kind of work she'd gone into architecture to do, civic and necessary, that would outlast its designer by decades if it was done well. He listened to her talk about load-bearing and natural light, and the specific challenge of designing for a community whose needs you have to research rather than assume, and he found himself watching her face the way he'd watched it in the library at 22, across her spread of drafting notes, when he'd already known and hadn't said. He cleared the plates. She stood and helped, moving through his kitchen with the ease of a person who has spent enough time in a space to stop being careful about it, opening the right cabinet for the dish soap without looking. He noticed. He noticed because this was the kind of thing he noticed. They ended up on the back porch, which faced the mountains. Wrapped in separate blankets because the cold out there was different from the cold of the street, sharper, realer, the kind that made you feel very awake. The snow on the mountains caught what moonlight there was, reflecting it back faintly. "Can I say something?" he asked. "You've asked me that before." A small, careful smile. The answer's still yes. Lun Nai, Ang Kong Moon, I am Lung Nua. It came out half in the wrong language. He caught himself and said it again. I don't want to be quiet this time. I've been quiet long enough. She turned to look at him. I spent 10 years not saying something, and then you moved in across the street, which is statistically improbable and also feels like something I'd have invented if I were the kind of person who invents things, which I'm not. I'm the kind of person who stands on his porch with a cold cup of coffee and doesn't say what he's thinking. He paused. I'm done with that. She was watching him with the expression she got when she was listening in the deep way, fully occupying the moment, not constructing her response yet, just receiving. I love you, he said. Not the way I did at 22, which was real but also incomplete. The way things are incomplete when you're 22 and haven't lost anything yet. The way I do now. Which is different. Which is more. The mountains reflected back their silence. She reached across the distance between their chairs and took his hand. I love you too, she said. I think I've loved you longer than I've known what to do with it. He looked at her hand in his, at the cold and the quiet and the improbable stars. Okay, he said. Okay, she agreed. He leaned toward her, and she met him, and they kissed on the back porch of his house in Aspen in February, while the mountains held their long blue silence and the snow went on doing what it had been doing all winter, which was simply and persistently accumulating, making the world softer and stranger and more its own particular self. They didn't announce anything. There was nothing to announce, to no audience requiring a declaration, no timeline to broadcast. It simply was what it was, and what it was something both of them moved into carefully, with the deliberateness of people who had made mistakes before and understood why deliberateness mattered. She kept her house. She had her studio, her project, her mornings. He had his work, his routines, the particular infrastructure of his days with Lily. They didn't collapse into each other. They built something alongside, separate but adjacent, the way two structures can be designed to complement each other without compromising either's integrity. Which was, he thought, a very engineering way to think about it, and probably accurate. Tuesday and Thursday coffees continued. Weekends expanded, naturally, the way they do when two people stop being careful about how much time they spend together. She started keeping a coffee mug at his house, not a deliberate gesture, just the result of bringing one over and leaving it, which was itself a kind of gesture. He stopped making 2 cups by accident in the morning. He started making 2 cups on purpose. Lily, characteristically, did not make a fuss. She absorbed the new shape of things with the pragmatic acceptance of a 7-year-old who has learned that adult arrangements change and you might as well see what the new one contains. What it contained, as far as she was concerned, was someone who remembered how she liked her hot chocolate and could be talked to at length about the Kayla situation and who was making their kitchen smell like things he didn't usually cook, which she considered an improvement. One Sunday in March, late morning, Emily sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and project notes spread around her in a specific gravitational system that Daniel had learned not to disturb, while Lily lay on the living room floor with a library book, and the Sunday quiet settled into the house like something earned. He stood in the doorway between the rooms, coffee in hand, still warm this time, and looked at both of them. Emily, frowning thoughtfully at a site elevation drawing, pencil tucked behind her ear. The radiator ticking. Snow falling outside, soft and indifferent, on a street where an orange truck had once stopped and changed the particular character of his ordinary life. He stood there long enough that Emily looked up and caught him. "What?" she said. "Nothing." She studied him, then returned to her drawing. But he caught, before she looked down, the small, particular thing her expression did. The 3-stage arrival, and then the actual smile, aimed at her work rather than at him, private, for no particular audience. He went back to the kitchen. He refilled his coffee. He sat down at his end of the table. Outside, the snow continued, patient and faithful, covering the street where it had all begun. The email arrived on a Tuesday in March at 11:17 in the morning, while Emily was at the studio and Daniel was on a call with a client in Portland who kept dropping audio. She texted him about it at noon. Marcus reached out. "Just so you know, I'm going to handle it. Wanted you to know before you heard it some other way, even though there's no other way you would hear it. Call me tonight?" He finished the Portland call. He sat with his phone for a moment. Then he texted back. "Okay, I'll call you tonight." He didn't ask questions she hadn't offered. He didn't produce a reaction she hadn't asked for. He finished his workday, picked up Lily, made dinner, read the required chapter, got her into bed, and then sat on the back porch with his coat and called Emily. She picked up on the second ring. "He wants to try again," she said, without preamble. The way she did things when she decided not to make them harder by approaching them obliquely. "He's been in therapy. He says he understands things now he didn't understand then." "Okay," Daniel said. "I wanted to be honest with you about it." "I know. Thank you." A pause. "You're not going to say anything else? What would you like me to say?" "I don't know." A breath. Something. He looked at the mountains, dark against the darker sky. "I trust you," he said. "That's what I would say. I'm not going to perform concern about this, or ask you to prove something to me, or make this about my comfort." He reached out. "You're handling it. That's all I know right now." Silence on the line. Then, "That's a very mature response. I'm working on it." A small exhale that might have been a laugh. "I don't have feelings for him, Daniel. I want to be clear. What I feel when I see his name is complicated, in the way that things are complicated when they were once your life. But it's not what you might think. I believe you. Just like that? Just like that." Another pause. "I'm going to call him back and tell him no. I've known that since I saw the email. I just needed," she stopped, "to say it out loud." He stayed on the phone while she did it. He didn't listen. Obviously, he set the phone on the railing and looked at the sky and listened to the snow falling, which made a sound like the inside of a seashell if you got quiet enough. When he picked the phone back up, she was already there. "Done," she said. "Okay. Are you still there?" "I'm here." The longest pause yet. Then, very quietly, "Good. Don't stop being there." 3 days later, a storm came in from the northwest, the kind the forecasters had been warning about for a week. The real kind, not Aspen's routine snowfall but a serious accumulation, the kind that closes roads and rewrites the landscape and makes the familiar unfamiliar again. Daniel spent the afternoon making sure the generators were fueled and the firewood was stacked. Lily beside him making what she called a snow inventory, which appeared to be a count of the snowflakes she could see, a number she reported periodically, and had already revised upward 3 times. He made soup. He taught Lily how to properly stir it without turning it into a physics experiment. At 6 o'clock, the power flickered and held, and they ate by candlelight, which Lily considered a significant improvement over electric light and said so. At 7:30, he looked out the front window and across the street. Emily's house was lit up. She'd made it home from the studio before the storm got serious. He knew because she'd texted, and he could see the warm square of her kitchen window through the falling snow. At 8, Lily, in bed, the house settling around the storm. He was washing the soup pot when he heard the knock. He opened the front door. She was on his porch. Her coat was white with snow, her breath clouding in the cold. Her cheeks red from walking across the street, which had probably taken longer than usual given the accumulation. She held something, the candle from the Saturday dinner, unlit, in both hands, which told him she'd grabbed it on the way out the door without thinking about it. "Hi," she said. "I was sitting in my house," she said, "and the storm was doing what it was doing. And I thought," she stopped, looked at him. "I didn't want to be across the street." He stepped back from the doorway. She came inside. He took her coat, hung it on the hook where it had been accumulating a specific kind of permanence over the past weeks. The hook she'd started using without being assigned it, one of those small territorial facts that establish themselves without announcement. He took the candle and set it on the entry table. She was standing in the middle of his hallway, looking up at him, hair loose from her knot, snow still melting from the ends of it. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the 10 years. Which I know I need to stop doing. Eventually you can't spend your whole future accounting for the past. But I've been thinking about it, and I've realized something." He waited. "We were always going to end up here," she said. "Not because of fate or inevitability, I don't believe in that, exactly. But because of who we both are. Because of the way we both," she found the words, "refuse to say the wrong thing and end up saying nothing at all. We were going to need to get here the long way, through everything else, through the people and the cities and the years, because we weren't ready before. Either of us." He looked at her for a long time. "Don't be logical about this," she said, a little fiercely. "Just let me finish. I wasn't going to be logical. You always want to be logical. I was going to say you're right." A pause. "Oh," she said, "you're right. We needed the long way, and we took it, and now we're here." He stepped toward her, closed the last of the distance between them, took her face in his hands, which were warm from the dish soap and the soup and the domestic reality of the last 2 hours. "And I'm not going to waste any more of it being quiet." She put her hands over his. Outside, the storm was doing what storms do, persistent and indifferent, and in its way magnificent, rearranging the street and the houses and the familiar landmarks into something new that would be, by morning, beautiful. Inside, on the stairs, there was a small sound, a creak, a footstep, and then Lily's voice from the landing, uncertain and hopeful. "Is Em here?" He looked up. His daughter was at the top of the stairs in her star and moon quilt, squinting down at them. Emily turned toward her. "Hi, Bug." Lily considered this for a moment, the snow on the coat by the door, the unlit candle, the two of them standing in the hallway in the storm quiet. "Are you staying?" she asked. Daniel looked at Emily. Emily looked at Daniel. "Yeah," Emily said. "I'm staying." Lily made the sound of someone receiving information they had already more or less assumed and turned back toward her room. "Good," she said. "You can have breakfast with us. Dad makes the kind with the crispy parts on the edge." Her door closed. Emily's face, in the dim hallway light, was doing all 3 stages, then the actual smile, and then something past the smile that he didn't have a word for yet but thought he might have years to find one. He pulled her close. She let him. The storm pressed against the windows, patient and vast, and the house pushed back with warmth, with the smell of soup and candle wax and pine needles beginning to fall from a Christmas wreath that nobody had taken down. Outside, the snow covered the street, covered the sidewalk where they'd stood 10 years apart and then stood together, covered the tire tracks of an orange truck that had arrived one morning and rearranged everything. It covered all of it equally, without judgment, the way snow covers everything, not erasing it, just making it white, making it a surface on which something new might, in the morning, begin.